Okay, so the first thing we're going to do in Rhino is set up our view. So making sure that we're oriented in the right direction, that we're at the correct height, looking in the right direction, all those kind of things that make up an effective composition for perspectives. I'm going to go ahead and delete this real quick. I'm going to build off of this detail that we worked on before the break. Obviously, there's the area 2 where you have the platform. Again, the same rules and principles apply. It's just a matter of choosing that new location. So what I like to do is once I've kind of designed out my model, setting up that view. So what I'm going to do is create a vertical line. So I'm going to type line, hit V for vertical. I'm going to start that somewhere on this path. You'll see it highlights when it's snapping to the top of that. I'll start towards one end of this pathway. That way I have a nice long view of this. I'm going to click, and then it's going to want to snap in the up direction. And how tall, like this is going to be our reference for a first person perspective of someone walking on the path. So how tall should that line be?
5'10", 6 feet.
5'10", 6 feet, so anywhere around that 5.5 to 6 foot range. I generally pick 5.5. Again, it doesn't really matter, but again, you guys understand the significance of creating that perspective for the person. What's nice is once you establish that, you'll see in the properties. Are you guys familiar with this workflow? I don't know if I've even walked. Okay, some aren't, I guess. What's great about that is once you create that line for the person, you have some properties for your camera. So camera, I can place this and have it placed at the very top of this line. So now you can see that the camera is at 4.21. That's probably because this is a little bit below that C plane. The other important thing to do, though, is make sure that your target Z is the same as this one. That way you're looking almost perfectly horizontal. It's not to say that you have to. Maybe you find a reason to look up or look down, but for the most part, for renderings, you want it to look perfectly horizontal. So make sure that you also change this to be the same value as this. So 4.22, it's close enough. So now we know we're looking in the right direction. I wish that this would look more, so you could toggle or mess with your target ones as well. So you could always change these coordinates. So that's like -500. I'm actually just going to kind of cheat it a little bit like this. Then I'll replace it. So that's about right. I've already set up a view, but once you do that, you can go ahead and toggle, make any slight adjustments, right click, set view, name views, and save that. I've already got one set up, so I'm not going to override this. So I'm just going to double click. This is what I've already set up. And the next thing you want to do is start to adjust your shadow settings for this. So go up to render, render properties. So this has to do with a couple things, the size of this printout. I talked a little bit the week before spring break of where you might want to place these, how they might to place. I always like to do my renderings as like a full bleed composition. So in order to effectively do that, you need to make sure that your resolution and DPI are matching. So you want to start with a 300 DPI. And if you have a board that's 24 inches wide, what should that resolution be? At least on the x-axis.
times 20, did you say? You said it's 20 inches wide?
24 inches, 24
So
by 30.
300 times 24 inches gives you that.
Exactly. So 7,200. So what's good is you can set the viewport to make sure that you're sticking within your window frame. And then you can just immediately go to custom, change this size. You can lock it too, just so it doesn't screw up anything. And you can just change that to be 7,200. Hit OK. And now this is at the correct resolution. That way you won't lose any of the image quality by resizing it. I'm not going to render because that's just going to take a really long time. I've rendered one out that's a little bit smaller just for the sake of time. So I'm just going to go back to my viewport settings. So that's good. The next thing you want to do is give it a little bit of an ambient light. It's probably going to be defaulted to this pure black. So if I hit OK, and do a quick render preview. What's good is the render preview will still give you a decent, let's undo one thing before I jump into this part. So render preview. What I was saying is that what's great about the render preview is it'll at least have your shadow settings pretty much spot on. It's just going to have this kind of pixeled edges between things, but those will get smoothed out. But the important thing is that it does give you the correct lighting condition. What's unfortunate about this is that the shadows are pretty intense and dark, and they're actually covering up the geometry that's underneath. Usually when you have a shadow project onto something, you can still see the object that it's covering, it's just darker. With these settings set up as they are, they completely blanket out that, so you can't even really see what that geometry is. So we want to mess around with that a little bit more. So the first thing you can do is go to render properties and actually increase your ambient light to be a little bit grayer. So it doesn't have to be much. I usually stick within the 50 to 60 value for that gray tone. Like I said, you don't want to completely wash it out, but you want to just give it a little more extra light. Hit OK. Render preview. And now you'll see it's a little bit lighter. You can start to see those shadowed areas a little bit more clearly. But again, the shadow's not quite right. So now I'm going to go to sun. I'm going to turn the sun on. And this is going to be really important for you to decide when this person is actually experiencing this landscape. Sometimes it's good to find your photos first, see what those light settings are, and then recreate those or try to match them in Rhino. I'm going to go for more of that kind of early morning light quality. So I'm going to make sure to pick something that's in this morning, in this more yellow spectrum. We'll have a nice spring walk sometime in April. I'm pretty happy with that. For those of you that don't know, you can even choose the location, which you can find an exact location for Las Vegas. Let's see what that does now. So now we can start to see that shadow projecting over here. But like I said, that shadow really blankets what happens under there. So in order to correct that, I'm going to type sun again. I'm going to turn on the skylight. This is going to give a diffused light to the space that's going to show off that geometry that's being covered by the shadow. This is always like a good thing to have. You're going to lose some of that yellow color tone, but we can always fix that in Photoshop. The shadows are still going to be projected correctly. You're just going to see that there's a lot more revealed. So let's do that one more time. So there we go. Now we can start to see like where those edges start to connect, where we can see how there's a little bit of a diffused light quality on top of the projected shadow. This actually creates a more dynamic lighting composition because it's showing projected shadow and it's also showing shade. You all know what the difference between shadow and shade are? Yes, no? Who knows the difference? Think of a building.
The shadow is the dark spot that is, well, the shadow is the dark spot that's created, and then shade would be, what is this?
So look at
the effect of it on you. I mean,
so look at this
shadow.
part right here. There's the part that's being projected, the shadow, and then there's the part that's not being lit. That's the shade, right? So areas that are shade are areas that just aren't being hit by the sun because they're facing away from it. Shadow is the projection of that object. So whenever you hear the terms shade and shadow, know that they aren't the same thing, that if you need to correct the shade, it's more about revealing some of that or bringing that out versus correcting your shadow projection. That's just something to always be aware of. So right now I'm fairly happy with my shade and shadow quality. You can then actually render it out. Again, that's going to take a little bit of time, not too much because it's at a low resolution, but you'll see that the quality of this is certainly enhanced. And like I said, I'm not going to wait. I've already done this, so we'll just skip ahead. So you've got your rendering set up. I usually like to stay just within the clay modeling render. I don't, unless there's something really intricate going on, I try to avoid adding materials because that's just one more thing that the renderer has to process, and it just adds more time that, for the most part, I can usually manually fix in Photoshop. So let's go ahead and open up that render. So here's what was created. We have our image. Now we need to make sure it's set up for, in this case, the full composition. So the first thing I'm going to do, and this should have already be done through your process, but if you decide to cheat it a little bit and fix it in Photoshop, this is how to do that as well. I'll go to image, image size. You'll see that here it's at 300 DPI, but the size is a 5 by 2.5 size image, which is clearly nowhere near those required dimensions. So I'm just going to simply change the width to be 24. Its length, which means it's going to also change the height of that. I'll hit OK. So it really doesn't do too bad. And for this too, there's going to be a lot of, this clay model is really going to be only used for the shadow for our rendering. So a lot of that's going to get kind of blended nicely with the rest of the rendering. So we have that set up, but we still need to be 24 by 36. So I'll go to image. Now I'll go to canvas size. I'll drop this down to say like add my pixels above this workspace. And I'll change this to 36. And now I have my 24 by 36. Go ahead and unlock this layer so we can start to get rid of some of these pixels. I don't need this gray background. You can adjust the settings in Rhino to give you a transparent. That's one way to do it, or you can just get rid of them in Photoshop. Again, it's just a simple gray background that you should be able to use the magic wand tool to delete. So I'll just select that, delete that. Let's get rid of this white part too. And the workflow I'm going to show you today, because it's a fairly rough, quick, gestural rendering, it actually works best to start from the background and work your way to the foreground because you're just going to slowly add to that composition. So the first thing I'm going to do is add some kind of background image. So go to File, Place Embedded. And so start to think about what is, again, this is really about what that journey or what that path is in relation to your landform. So maybe there's something iconic or something of interest to be looking at. This is a fairly interesting background with this um, rock formation. That's fairly interesting. So I'm going to place that in the background. I'll make sure to expand it all the way across. I'll place this behind my shadow. And I'll adjust it to make sure that I don't have too much of this foreground blending with this part that's kind of far back. So I want to make sure it's kind of set up correctly to scale. So that way I have this shrub that seems like it's probably at that correct scale. Maybe it needs to be a little bit lower. That's fine. And now I want to add to the rest of my composition. So the best way to do that is to also find a good sky. The rule of thumb for finding sky is to choose one that has something interesting going on, but in this case, it needs to be subtle. You can see even with these clouds, there's clearly some scattered clouds, but they all have those soft edges. They don't have those hard edges that a lot of those storm clouds have. So you'll see that the image I chose has a very similar cloud quality. It's, again, kind of has those very soft, but it's still fairly interesting. This is even along the beach, but we'll use our layer masking to make it seem like it fits perfectly within this landscape. So you'll see that the clouds are kind of starting to move from left to right based off of that angle, whereas these ones, it's kind of looking dead on, so some are going to the left, some are going to the right. If I flip this horizontally, it'll look like they match it a little bit better. So I'm going to go ahead and make this much larger as well. I'll go ahead and put this behind this one. I'll start to kind of scale it until it looks like there's parts of the cloud that are matching the other. So let's drag that. Let's see if I can find it like I did before. I think I had a much lower. It's always good in this case too to have quite a bit of overlap. That's the way the blending mode is going to most effective, or not the blending mode, but the layer masking is going to most effectively work. So that kind of works. You can have these parts that are starting to match. So now I'm going to take my background of this landscape. I'm going to give this a mask. And you guys are all familiar with layer mask from what I've heard. Good. I'll take a nice, large, soft brush. I'll make sure its opacity is around 30. Make it really big. Oh, that sounded weird. I don't know what happened to my voice there. And now I'll just start to, again, with that mask, start to kind of erase. Oops, let's make sure that it's set to black, not white over here. Now I'll just start to blend, and now you can see how the clouds almost look like they merge perfectly. Start to fade that a little bit. And that almost looks pretty seamless, I'd say. You can see if I turn that back off, what that difference is. So yeah, now we're talking. So that's cool. So it's important to make sure you pick those very similar cloud formations in order to match them fairly well together. So like I said, we're going to be working from the background and working our way up. So the other thing too is to then find those similar images that match this landscape. I always try and think that you kind of add your kind of background, then you add a kind of base coat to this composition where you just want to get more or less the terrain, and then you start to include things that have some detailed vegetation to blend it. So we're going to work that way as well. So file, let's place another image. Again, picking very similar images that have that color temperature are going to be crucial for this. You can see that, let's see if we can make these a little bit larger, that all these images are clearly taken either in the late afternoon or early morning based off of that kind of nice, deep, rich shadow that's being projected. They have the same similar kind of orangish brown tone to them. So let's pick this one now. So I'm going to take this image, and now I'm going to place this above my image here. Let's make it a little bit larger. So I'm going to free transform it. And the temperature, the color temperatures don't have to be exact. We can apply a filter to do that as well. So I want to just make sure I've got a decent location of where this is. Maybe it's a little bit smaller. So there we go. I know that the shadows aren't perfect, but again, this is kind of our base coat. We're going to put quite a bit on top of this, or not quite a bit, but we will be putting other textures on top of it. So it's not too crucial. If you guys are really concerned, you could always just flip it. But again, I'll go ahead and apply a mask to this. Let's get rid of all this extra part. You can jump that up to like 100% to really just quickly delete it. I'll even delete some of that excess. I always like to really kind of over exaggerate and delete a lot of it. And then you can just go back in. So switch it back to the white, increase that opacity or decrease it to like 30 because you're just wanting to subtly brush it in so that you essentially just get rid of those hard edges. Maybe you want to paint back part of that yucca again. What's nice, like again, they're completely different images. This one has the sky, but then it's got some of those very similar plants behind it that are similar to this. So you can still fairly easily blend it in without having to perfectly crop it out. This is the power of using those layer masks to just easily blend completely different images with each other. So there we go, we're starting to get there. Let's get rid of some of that. So now we have like a nice little middle ground piece right there. Again, the colors aren't perfect, but we can apply a fairly simple layer adjustment to correct that. So let's add one more part to this. So file, place embedded, and I'm going to use this image, and I'm just going to use it twice on both sides of that path. Again, I see the shadows are going to the right, so I'm going to flip it. I can, again, enlarge it so it's at a more appropriate scale. So maybe I do. Yeah, something like that would work. Let's go ahead and again, apply a layer mask. I'm going to delete or mask it all right away. So if I have that mask selected, I can hit Control-I to convert it all to black. And like we've been doing before, I'm just going to slowly brush those textures back on. Kind of fill in some of that white space. We can see that the scale is definitely off. which isn't a huge issue. I mean, those are probably a little bit bigger than what's supposed to be. I can start to make sure that those brushes or those bushes still kind of pop out. What's cool about this is that you'll see that there's the image itself, and then there's the mask, and then there's this link between the two. If you select that, you turn off that link, which means if you scale one, it's not going to scale the other. The mask itself is fairly good. We just need to make the image a little bit larger. So I'm going to, instead of having my mask selected, I'm going to have that texture or that desert landscape selected. I'm going to right click it with my marquee tool, free transform, and actually can just scale that texture without affecting my layer mask. So now it's starting to get a little bit bigger. I think that previous one I did was much better. Oh, I had like that shrub right there. So that might be better too. Let's just add this little dead bush right here. Then I'll just go back to that mask, get rid of some of this. That bush pop out a little bit more. Oops. Again, the edges between these are the most crucial. I'm going to turn off these for now. I'm going to go back to the shadow layer. I'm going to use the magic wand tool to just create this hard edge between the two. That way when I go back to here, let's invert that selection. Oops. Now I can just get rid of this part so it's clear that there's that hard edge. Maybe that's where you add a material for your retaining wall or something. Now it looks like it clearly gets stopped by something. Now I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to copy that layer. Oops. Let's relink it. I'll go ahead and copy it over to here. I can reapply this mask to it. I'm going to do the same thing. I'll make sure that the texture, let's use more of these rocks now on this area. Oops, let's just start from scratch. Let's delete that mask. So you have your image here. You're more or less happy with that scale and location. Apply that mask. Control I to get rid of it. And then just brush it back. Again, just focusing on those hard edges. Have it start to bleed with that landscape by just kind of clicking. There you go. So the last thing we're going to do is now add the pathway to this, because you don't want to have just this kind of white mass right there, that kind of weird wedge. A lot of people think that they can just take a flat gravel texture and then distort it and get it to fit. Unfortunately, it looks very obvious that that's what you did, because the shadows that are being created by the gravel, they look like they've been kind of stretched out instead of finding a photograph that looks like a pathway. I used to do that, and then I realized that it looks kind of awful after you've kind of nicely blended everything else together. So it's always good to actually find an image of a pathway that's somewhat following this. So you can see that it's starting to kind of go, and then it winds a little to the left. I was lucky enough to find an image that's very similar to that same kind of form as if you're walking on that pathway. So I'm going to take that image. I can make it a little bit larger here. I'll make sure that it's pretty much following that same direction. Let's drop that underneath. Or let's keep it there actually. And then, like always, I'm gonna apply that mask, invert it, and then I'm just gonna brush that texture back in. Let's got some of that soil popping up, but it's starting to look like it's breeding well. What's good about this is that it also has this kind of gravel edge instead of a hard curved edge, just like in this landscape. So they kind of play well off of each other. The one thing you'll probably notice at this point is that you've entirely lost your clay model shadow, right? It's pretty much been masked with all these textures. It works good right now as a guideline. And once you've kind of placed everything where it should go, so there it's just this layer, I'm going to put this on top of everything. And then I'm going to change the blending mode to multiply. And so now it's going to slowly get rid of all those white pixels and have the shadow start to come back. Oops, I think I moved. Nope, I didn't. There's just some blending that still needs to happen over there. Let's go back to the normal setting. So again, this, when you use it for the multiply, you're allowing the shadows of the dark pixels to remain and have it slowly fade as it gets closer to white. Absolute white completely disappears. Absolute black stays. And then the gradient of grays in between blend based off of that white value. Does that make sense? So like as you get 10%, it's just very faint. 50, it's kind of middle. So we still want some of those shadows to pop. We lose a lot of it as it stands right now. There's some areas that are kind of distinct, but for the most part, we lose quite a bit of it. So I'm gonna go up to Image, Adjustments, and Levels for the shadow, and I'm going to enhance some of those color values by adjusting those scrubbers on either end. So I'm going to take this area, which is in charge of the shadows, and start dragging them to the right to make those a little more rich. And the other thing to be aware of when you're using this kind of blending technique is that you kind of want to exaggerate some of the qualities because they're going to get blended and you're going to lose it. So it's sometimes good to over exaggerate. So I'm going to make the shadows a little bit darker than they should. I'll hit OK. Then I'll go back and change this to multiply. And now you can see that those shadows have a much more obvious impact on this. I'm not sure which one's screwing up this part. Let's just kind of brush some of that stuff again. Get rid of our edge. So there we go. Real subtle. So now we have a fairly complete composition. Now we have to do a little bit of post-process work. Like I said, the oranges are a little off, and for the purpose of this, it's a fairly intense image of color quality. We want the detail to slowly fade as it gets further away. So the first thing I'm going to do is make sure to match the color tone. So I'm going to go down to here with the layers, change that adjustment, I'm going to choose the photo filter. And what's nice is it defaults to this orange or this warm filter. You can change a cool filter if that's what you want to, but we're already in that same color tone. Now I'm going to increase this value. And now you can start to see if I turn that on or off, how it kind of made all those earth tones. Oops, I don't know why it's zooming out. Not zooming out. Zoom out. So you can see the difference it has where there's these color values, there's the sky. This starts to like blend it all nicely together. So they feel like they're all in the same family. Like I said, the last thing you want to do is then start to kind of give it a slight fade to it. So I'm going to create another layer adjustment and choose hue and saturation. I'm going to change the lightness of this. So if I increase the white, you can start to see how it starts to make everything fade, which is fine. We want to pick something, start at the high end because we're going to use a lot of the sky for putting our other graphics on, like the site plan. We want to make sure that those parts are legible. So we want it to be somewhat almost white, but still have the sky faintly there. So I'm okay with that for now. And now I'm going to use my gradient tool to fade that mask back. So again, this is going to work like everything else. It's just using a gradient. The white means it's going to keep this image adjustment versus the black is going to mask it away. So I'm going to make sure I start from the black by hitting X. And then now it's wherever I first click, it's going to go black and then it's going to fade to white because I want to bring some of this back. So I'll make sure it's black is the foreground, white is the background. We can even see, imagine here's your first click, there's your second click on this. And I'm going to, let's start it around here. I'll hold shift so it's nice and linear. And now we can start to see it's, maybe we want a little bit more of that. But now we can see how adding that mask slowly fades the rest of your composition as it gets further away without really damaging the overall image quality. You can always accentuate it a little bit more if you want. I mean, it's already almost at that max, but like I said, it gives it a lot more depth and atmosphere to this rendering. There's one more thing to add to this that I'm not going to worry too much about, but what do you think that should be? People, yay, we want to see someone actually walking on this path. So make sure to add someone, a person to this. Do the same thing where you add a shadow to them, make sure that that's all right. Something you could do too if you're not real thrilled with this hard edge of a shadow, again, that's just this layer. I can also make a mask for that. And I can then use the brush and just kind of brush on that hard edge. So it just kind of fades into that. Again, the thing that throws off most of the renderings is when you have that conflict of hard edges that shouldn't be there. So there you go. Any question? Yeah. I don't know. Maybe. No, I mean, that's something, I mean, if you, once you start to add a person, sure, yeah, this probably should be a little bit smaller. If I think of this as a 3-foot pathway or 2-foot, maybe that's more in the right scale, but what's great about this is that I can always go back to that layer. I'll unclick this. I'll change the scale of just that image. Maybe shift it back up a little till I get a more appropriate scale. I think that, yeah, that one's definitely throwing it off. This one is too, but oh well. Any other questions? Okay. So once you've figured that out, I'm gonna play with this gradient a little bit more. So I'm just gonna make a little bit more of that fade away as well. Again, it's very slight, but it helps. So I'll go ahead and save this. I'm going to also save it as a JPEG, so it's compressed. It's still saving. So save as a JPEG. This will just make your file size management much more doable. Okay, so while that's saving, let's jump into some of the other deliverables. So you have your site plan drawing. I'm gonna make the canvas for this. That's annoying. The canvas space for this to be 21 inches squared, roughly. I want this, because again, it should be scaled at 1 inch equals 25 feet, which you should be able to do from Rhino when you export it. Everyone knows how to export to scale from Rhino? Yeah, okay. So let's do 21 by 21. Make sure that I've covering it all. I'll start to make sure that my line weight is correct and the color. For this one, you don't have to show the existing contours, just show your proposed site grading plan. It's in the detailed plan drawings that you want to show both the existing and the proposed. So for this, let's just kind of work our way across. So we have our platform. That's going to be fairly distinguishable. So I'm going to make sure that that's at a gray tone, maybe 2 points. Again, I can adjust these based off of all the content once I've adjusted it. Let's make this a little bit lighter. A 1 tone, that looks like it's working okay. Let's do the pathway for this one. I'm gonna make it still a lighter tone, but it's gonna read as a fairly thick line. You don't have to model it out to be that right dimension, but if you make sure to give it a distinguished thickness as if it looks like it's a wide path, that'll be sufficient. I'm just gonna kind of cheat where this, I think, goes. So that way it's just very noticeable, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the exact width. I'm gonna also include those detailed areas. So I've got these 2 rectangles here. In this case, I'm going to kind of look back at my rendering. I see that I've got some orange tones in this. So maybe because these are viewports, they aren't part of the site plan, I want to contrast them. So I'm going to give them also an orange color and make them a little bit thicker and maybe even make them a dashed line. That way it's obvious that these aren't part of the grading plan, that they're just those call outs. And then I think that's really it. And then you have your section cuts that are happening along that pathway. Those also need to be included on this. So they don't need to, again, stick out too much, but they should be present. So they're about the same as the contours. I can maybe make them slightly wider, 1.5. Maybe I'll make the contours a little bit thinner. It's a 0.75. Again, how many line weight types should you have in a drawing? 4, yay, minimum of 4. So we've got our platform line weight, the pathway, the contours, section cuts, these rectangles. So that even gives us about 5 because they're all different. So I'm going to go ahead and save this once I've got those adjustments made. So plan view, let's just call this 2. And what I'm going to do for this is I'm going to now make this canvas space the full 24 by 36. So I'm going to change that to be 24, 36. Move it down a little bit. Now I'm going to create a new layer, drop that to the bottom, go to File, Place. Let's go to this rendering. I'm not sure where I ended up. See, there it is. I'm just going to wait for that to load, and now I'm just going to click there. And now we start to formulate our composition for this. The next thing I want to do, again, to kind of help with the composition of this, is that there's this kind of weird instance where I have these hard edges of my contours intersecting or overlapping with the image. How many of you knew that you can apply a layer masking tool in Illustrator? So I know, like, I'm sure you are familiar with creating a clipping mask where you just give a hard boundary around everything. But just like in Photoshop, you can actually apply a layer mask to this where you can actually blend or fade the edges of that clipping plane, essentially. So I just want to apply that to my contour line so that there's not this hard edge right there. So I'm going to go to my contour layer. So there's that. I'm going to have everything selected. I'm going to group it. So I'm going to Control G. Now on that same layer, I'm going to also create a rectangle, draw it over this, maybe even make it a little bit shorter than those contours. Hit Shift X to just make that a fill. And then I'll actually give it a gradient. And like I said, I want to fade the bottom of this. So in order to fade it, you use, again, the black to mask those pixels. So I'll use my gradient tool over here. I'll rotate it, hold Shift to make sure it's orthogonal. And I'll make sure, I don't want it to be a nice kind of uniform gradient. I really just want it to kind of get masked toward this bottom over here. So you can start to kind of picture that this black part is what's going to get faded away and then slowly go back to what it should look like. So I'm going to go back to my layer. I'll click this button over here so it selects both that gradient and the contours. I'll go over to my transparency panel. So if that's not there, you can just go to Window, Transparency, and you'll see that there's an option here to make a mask. So I'm going to select that. Oops, I don't know why it's done this before. Let's make sure both of those are selected. There we go. So you can see there's our contour thumbnail, and then here's that gradient mask that we've applied. And now you can see when I zoom in how these contours slowly kind of fade away from that image so that they kind of blend with that image. So that's a nice thing to know, that you can actually apply a layer mask to vector graphics. And then the last thing you need to do then, at least for this composition, is add those detailed drawings. So I've already got a couple of them pulled up. I've already created this one. So you can see that I have my proposed contours as this hard line, and then the dashed are the existing contours. So you can see that clear distinction between the two. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this because it's not necessary for this part. I'll go ahead and save it. So path, detail path edited. Let's go back to this file, do file place. I'll just click somewhere in here. It should still, again, be set to a scale. Let's put it on its own layer. Put this above everything else. And in this case, it's kind of difficult to figure out where do I place. If I put it all the way over here, we start to kind of lose a lot of our rendering composition. Right over here, it might work a little bit better, but it seems like it'd be more appropriate to have the platform detail drawing right there. So instead of using these rectangles, maybe I should use a circle. So I'm going to just go ahead and create a circle here. Again, I'm not changing the scale, I'm just changing the frame of that drawing. I don't believe the assignment says that it has to be a certain dimension, just a certain scale. So I'm going to have both of those selected, make a clipping mask, and I'll do the same thing. I'll give it that orange boundary, give it some thickness so that it's clearly not part of the drawing, that it's a separate piece. Maybe I'll then put that up over here. And then instead of having a dashed box, I'll have a dashed circle. And then, of course, your favorite thing, annotate which one's which. Drop it down a little bit. And then I would say don't do a circle and a square, just choose one or the other. So I'll just copy that one. Oops. And then I'll do the same thing with that detail and put it probably somewhere down there. So that's how you can start to set up your composition. Again, I'm trying to provide alternatives to those traditional or conventional ways of kind of placing them in a very kind of rigid and uninformative manner that these start to kind of read off of each other instead of being kind of compartmentalized. And now you'll have an award-winning design, or at least a competition entry, I don't know. You'll be surprised how much board layout and composition goes for competitions and stuff. So. Any questions? Clear as mud? Clear as regraded mud? Sandy mud, sandy loam? I'm done. So what's the really important element that needs to be in here that I didn't do, but you should do? Annotation. Yay. Good. Make sure to do that. Nope, this is your header. This whole thing is your, see, we're just incrementally building on that. Instead of just seeing a nice kind of rendered header, now your whole board composition is going to take on that quality. If you're really good, you could attempt to, in Rhino, have your contours turned on. Let's see if it wasn't working before, so I nixed it for this. In fact, I don't know. I don't even know where my contours went. Oh, it's like if you're really good, you could have your contours turned on. Let's see if I can get away with it. So select objects, select this as well. I'm going to type make 2D. Like I said, it's probably not going to work, but we'll give it a shot. Yeah, I don't know why it doesn't want to capture it, but if you guys have luck, you could use that make 2D command and that view, and then in the rendering, you could actually show your contours of your site kind of overlaid on top of it to kind of reinforce that geometry. I don't know why mine's not working. That usually does work, so yeah. Yeah. No, I hope you were paying attention. Let's go ahead and stop recording.